Hey guys, tonight we begin with something genuinely unsettling that everyone at the time thought was perfectly ordinary. The everyday horrors of Georgian England. Picture an age of powdered wigs, elegant curtsies, dainty teacups, and refined manners, all balanced politely on top of a world so grim it would make your worst Monday look like a spa retreat. Before we drift off into this powdered, poxy, gin-soaked wonderland, a quick and heartfelt thank you to the listener who suggested tonight's topic. Your ideas genuinely shape what happens here, and this channel only grows because thoughtful people keep sending them in. So take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you, because somehow it is always the middle of the night somewhere. And if you would rather listen with your eyes closed, the channel is now on Spotify too, linked down in the description. Now dim the lights, switch on a fan for that soft background hum, get comfortable, and maybe keep your hands under the blanket, because you never know what is dripping from the windows above. Let us pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered what it felt like to drink gin for breakfast, lunch, and emotional support? Have you wondered whether you could survive a doctor whose finest medical instrument was a bucket to catch your own blood? Could you sit through a public hanging as a cheerful family day out, complete with snacks and souvenirs? Would you last a single afternoon in a world where the fashionable painted their faces with lead, sent small children up chimneys, and paid a penny to laugh at the suffering of strangers? And now, congratulations. You've just woken up in the year 1751 in the heart of Georgian England. You have a splitting headache, a suspicious rash, and a landlord downstairs who is already brewing something that is technically gin. Good luck. You open your eyes to darkness, damp, and the warm, unfamiliar elbow of a total stranger. Welcome to your bed, or rather the third of a bed you're renting for the night. In Georgian London, if you're poor, you do not get a room. You get a spot on a shared straw mattress in a crowded lodging house, squeezed between a dock worker, a beggar, and someone who has clearly given up on both hygiene and hope. If you paid only a penny, you do not even get to lie down. You get to sleep sitting up on a bench, draped over a rope stretched across the room, which the landlord cheerfully cuts at dawn to wake everyone at once. And this, believe it or not, is one of the more pleasant parts of your day. Let us take in your surroundings, though take in is perhaps the wrong phrase, since breathing deeply is a genuine mistake here. The room is low, the ceiling stained, and the air is a thick soup of unwashed bodies, spilled gin, wood smoke, and the faint but persistent memory of everyone who has slept here before you. There might be 20 people in a space meant for 6. There are no sheets to speak of, no pillows worth the name, and the single blanket you share has been fought over so many times it has taken on the texture of a battlefield. Personal space is a concept that has not yet been invented. You simply become one more warm shape in a pile of warm shapes, all of you politely pretending the others are not there. Now, you might imagine that paying money for a bed would guarantee a certain standard. You would be wrong. The straw beneath you is old, flattened, and quietly hosting a lively community of fleas and lice who consider you the evening's entertainment. Something scuttles along the wall. Something else drips from the ceiling. You decide wisely not to investigate either. The floor is sticky in ways you choose not to examine, and the whole establishment groans and creaks through the night like a ship that has given up on the sea. It is not so much a place to rest as a place to survive until morning. The truly grim part is the arithmetic of it all. A bed costs money, and money is exactly what you do not have. So you take the cheapest option, which means the rope, which means spending your night folded over a length of hemp like laundry left out to dry. Your back screams, your neck locks, and your legs go numb, but you cannot fall, because falling would mean waking, and waking would mean facing the day even sooner. It is the closest thing this century has to a budget hotel, if the hotel actively wanted you gone by sunrise, and gone you will be. When the first grey light seeps through the shutters, the landlord moves through the room like a farmer waking livestock. The rope is cut, the sleepers tumble, and the whole huddled mass of humanity is turned back out into the cold streets to begin again. You stand, you stretch, you feel every joint object in the strongest possible terms, and you step over the threshold into the waking city. There is no breakfast. There is no thank you for staying. There is only the day ahead, and the first order of business is a deeply personal one. Because nature is calling, and in Georgian England answering that call is not a private matter at all. Nature calls, and in Georgian England answering it is a genuinely public event. There is no bathroom, no plumbing, and certainly no flushing anything. There is a chamber pot in the corner, already generously contributed to by everyone in the house, and your only job is to add to it and then, at some point, deal with the consequences. That dealing usually involves tipping it out of a window into the street below, ideally after shouting a warning, though nobody ever moves quite fast enough. The streets run with waste, the cesspits leak into the wells, and the night soil men who empty the pits do so by hand, by candlelight for a living. You will never look at indoor plumbing the same way again. Let us walk you through the geography of Georgian waste, because it is genuinely everywhere. In the wealthier homes there might be a privy, which is a small closet built over a deep pit, offering the twin luxuries of a seat and a door. For everyone else, it is the pot, the yard, or a shared outhouse serving so many families that the queue rivals a modern coffee shop at breakfast. These pits fill slowly, steadily, and inevitably, and when they overflow, which they frequently do, the contents seep into cellars, gardens, and the groundwater that people are horrifyingly still drinking. Imagine getting your morning water from the same soil your neighbour's waste is quietly returning to. That is not a nightmare. That is Tuesday. The streets themselves are the great open drain of the age. Rain does not so much clean them as stir them, sending a grim tide of mud, animal dung, kitchen slop, and the emptied contents of 1,000 chamber pots sliding along the gutters. Pigs roam some districts as a kind of unpaid sanitation crew, eating whatever they find, which is a solution that raises far more questions than it answers. To cross the road in fine clothing is to risk ruin, which is why the wealthy hire crossing sweepers, small boys who clear a path through the filth for a coin. It is like paying a toll, except the toll is measured in how badly you would rather not step in something. Then there is the smell, which deserves its own paragraph, because it certainly earns its own presence. It is not a single smell, but a whole orchestra of them, rising from the gutters, drifting from the pits, and settling over the city like an invisible fog you can somehow taste. On a hot summer day it is genuinely staggering, strong enough to turn stomachs and, people firmly believe, to spread disease through the air itself. They're wrong about the exact mechanism, but they're not wrong that something here is making everyone sick. You learn, as everyone learns, to breathe shallow and complain little, and spare a thought for the night soil men, who do the job nobody else will. Under cover of darkness, when the streets are quiet, they climb down into the cesspits and haul the waste out by the bucketful, carting it away to be sold as fertilizer beyond the city. It is dangerous, filthy, and occasionally fatal work, done by candlelight in air that can quite literally suffocate. They are the unsung, unglamorous heroes of Georgian sanitation, and they are paid accordingly, which is to say barely at all. You watch one trudge past with his reeking cart, and you decide your own morning could have gone worse. So you square your shoulders, step around the worst of the gutter, and go in search of something to settle your nerves. And in this century, settling your nerves means one thing. It is early morning, your head hurts, and the sensible thing to do is clearly to start drinking, not tea, gin. In the height of the gin craze, cheap spirits flood the poorer parts of London like a flammable tide, and gin is drunk by absolutely everyone, at absolutely every hour, for absolutely every reason. It is cheaper than beer, cheaper than food, and warmer than your lodgings. Shops sell it by the cupful, some advertising that you can get drunk for 1 penny and dead drunk for 2, with clean straw to lie on afterward provided free of charge. It numbs the hunger, the cold, and the crushing awareness of your situation. It also slowly destroys you, but that is a problem for a later, blurrier version of yourself. To understand how this happened, you have to understand the economics of misery. Gin is cheap to make and cheaper to sell, taxed lightly and produced almost anywhere, with a still and a grudge against sobriety. For a poor Londoner living in one cramped, cold, hungry room, a cup of gin is the most affordable comfort available. It does in one swallow what a good meal, a warm fire, and a day off cannot, because none of those things are within reach. So you drink, and your neighbour drinks, and the woman next door drinks, and slowly an entire quarter of the city is quietly, cheerfully pickling itself into oblivion. The gin shops are everywhere, tucked into cellars, back rooms, and the fronts of respectable-looking buildings that are respectable in no other way. Some are little more than a plank, a barrel, and a queue. The quality is dreadful, often cut with turpentine, sulphuric acid, or whatever harsh substances make it burn hotter and stretch further. It scours your throat, blurs your eyes, and leaves you with a headache that could fell an ox, and yet you go back, because the alternative is facing the day sober, and nobody in their right mind wants to face this particular day sober. The consequences, of course, are catastrophic, and they are visible on every street. Families spend their last coins on gin instead of bread. Workers show up to their labours already unsteady, if they show up at all. Children are neglected, accidents multiply, and the poorest neighbourhoods sink into a haze that visitors describe with genuine horror. Reformers and moralists wring their hands, artists sketch grim scenes of drunken ruin, and the authorities eventually panic enough to pass laws trying to tax and restrict the flood. It works, slowly, but for now you are standing squarely in the middle of the tide, cup in hand. What is genuinely striking is how normal it all feels from the inside. Nobody thinks of the morning cup as strange, any more than you might think a cup of coffee strange. It is simply what you do. It is medicine, it is breakfast, it is friendship, it is the one reliable thing in a deeply unreliable world. The very idea that you might get through a Georgian morning without it would strike your neighbours as peculiar and, frankly, a little sad. The whole society has agreed, without ever quite saying so, that being slightly drunk is the reasonable response to being alive here. So you drink your penny's worth, feel the warmth spread, and decide that things are looking marginally less bleak. The world softens at the edges. You almost feel presentable, and presentable, it turns out, is exactly what you need to be, because if you are hoping to look anything like the fashionable people you pass in the better streets, you are about to make some truly alarming choices with your own face. If you are aiming to look fashionable today, congratulations, you are also aiming to slowly poison yourself. The height of Georgian beauty is skin so pale it looks almost dead, and the most popular way to achieve it is a face paint made with white lead. You smear it on thick, layer after layer, to hide smallpox scars, blemishes, and the general wear and tear of staying alive in this century. The lead eats into your skin, so you apply more to cover the damage, which causes more damage, in a loop that eventually turns fashionable ladies grey, sickly, and sometimes dead. Add a little arsenic here, a dab of mercury there, and you have a beauty routine that is quite literally to die for. Let us start with why anyone wants to look pale in the first place. A pale, untouched complexion signals that you do not work outdoors, that you're wealthy enough to stay inside, sheltered and idle, while the poor bake and burn in the fields and streets. Pale skin is not just pretty. It is a billboard advertising that you've never done an honest day's labour in your life. And in a society obsessed with rank and appearance, that message is worth almost any price, including, as it turns out, your health, your looks, and occasionally your life. The paint itself is a paste of white lead mixed with vinegar, blended into a smooth, deathly finish, and applied over the whole face and neck. On top of that goes rouge for the cheeks and lips, often coloured with more toxic compounds, and perhaps a beauty patch or two, small shapes of black silk stuck to the skin to cover blemishes and hint at flirtation. The finished effect is smooth, ghostly, and, in candlelight, genuinely striking. The problem is what happens underneath. Lead is a poison that the body cannot handle, and worn day after day it seeps in, damaging the skin it is meant to beautify and the body beneath it. So the fashionable trap snaps shut. The lead ruins your complexion, so you apply more lead to hide the ruin. Your skin greys and roughens, your hair thins, your teeth loosen, and a strange heaviness settles into your limbs. Rather than stop, which would mean revealing the damage, you paint over it, adding another layer to the mask. It is a slow, elegant self-destruction, carried out with a hand mirror and a steady supply of poison, and the most tragic part is that the victims often have no idea what is killing them. They only know that they must not, under any circumstances, be seen without their face on. There are famous casualties of this fashion, celebrated beauties who painted themselves into early graves, their deaths whispered about in drawing rooms even as other women reached for the very same pots of paint. The cautionary tales do little to slow the trend, because the pressure to conform is simply stronger than the fear of a distant, invisible harm. When the choice is between looking fashionable now and feeling unwell later, later loses every time. It is a lesson that, in fairness, humanity has not entirely learned even in your own century. By the time you finish, you look pale, powdered, and every inch the person of quality you're pretending to be. Your face is a smooth white canvas of chemical elegance, and you feel, all things considered, rather grand. But a fashionable face is only the beginning. No respectable Georgian would dream of stepping out with their own hair on display. What you need now, towering and white and faintly alive with unwelcome guests, is a truly magnificent wig. On top of your poisoned face goes the crowning glory of Georgian style, an enormous, towering, powdered wig. The taller and whiter, the better, and the whiteness comes from flour and starch, dusted on so heavily it fills the room like a small snowstorm. These wigs are expensive, elaborate, and almost never washed, which makes them the ideal holiday home for lice, fleas, and the occasional confused moth. Grand ladies keep long, thin sticks specifically for scratching inside their hair without disturbing the sculpture on their heads. You itch, you scratch, you reapply the powder, and you tell yourself it is all worth it, because in this world, looking clean matters far more than actually being clean. The wig you see is not a disguise but a declaration. A fine one is made from real human hair, often sold by poor women desperate for a few coins, then styled, curled, and mounted into shapes that defy both gravity and common sense. The grandest examples rise so high they must be built around wireframes and padding, decorated with ribbons, feathers, and in the most extravagant cases small ornaments arranged like a still life on the head. Wearing one is a feat of endurance. It is heavy, hot, and precariously balanced, and turning too quickly can send the whole magnificent structure listing like a ship in a storm. Then comes the powder, which is where things get genuinely absurd. To achieve that fashionable snow-white finish, The wig is dusted with fine powder made largely from flour, applied so liberally that people use special rooms, closets set aside purely for the messy business of powdering. You stand there, holding your breath while a cloud of it settles over your head, your shoulders, and everything within reach. That flour, it is worth noting, is flour that might otherwise have fed someone, which becomes an awkward point during the years when bread is scarce and hungry. Crowds start to notice how much of it is sitting on aristocratic heads. Now, about the guests. Because these wigs are worn for days or weeks without cleaning, and because the scalp beneath is no cleaner, they become bustling ecosystems of their own. Lice and fleas move in and settle down, raising families in the warm, powdered darkness. This is such a common problem that the elegant solution is not to wash the wig but to scratch discreetly, using a slender ornamental stick designed for exactly that purpose, so that a lady might relieve an itch mid-conversation without ruining her hairstyle or, heaven forbid, admitting anything is wrong. It is politeness and infestation, hand in hand. The whole enterprise smells about as good as you would expect. Between the unwashed hair, the stale powder, the sweat of wearing a heavy structure all day, and the small livestock in residence, a fashionable head is not a fragrant place. The answer naturally is more perfume, more powder, and a firm social agreement that nobody will mention it. Everyone is in the same faintly ripe boat, so nobody rocks it. To smell of powder and pomade is simply to smell like a person of quality, and a person of quality does not investigate too closely what lies beneath the surface. And yet you wear it proudly, because to go without would be unthinkable, like showing up to a grand event undressed. The wig is armour, status, and identity, all bundled into one itchy, teetering monument on your head. You adjust it carefully, dust off the worst of the fallen powder, and feel every bit the fashionable creature you're pretending to be. Which leaves only one thing before you can face the world properly. You are hungry, and it is time for breakfast, though whether what you're about to eat qualifies as food is a matter of some genuine debate. Time to eat, though the word food is doing some heavy lifting here. Your bread, that great staple of the Georgian table, has almost certainly been tampered with. Bakers and sellers stretch their flour with cheaper, whiter fillers like chalk, ground bone or alum, a chemical that whitens the loaf and makes it look purer and more expensive than it is. Your beer may be watered and doctored, your milk carried through filthy streets in open pails, your tea leaves already used once and dried out for resale. You chew, you swallow, and you try very hard not to think about what any of it actually contains. In Georgian England, every meal is a small act of blind trust. Let us begin with the bread, because bread is everything here. It is the foundation of the poor diet, the thing that fills the belly when nothing else will, and precisely because everyone needs it, everyone is tempted to cheat with it. White bread is prized as finer than dark, so unscrupulous bakers whiten cheap flour with alum, which fools the eye and hardens the loaf while quietly wreaking havoc on the digestion. Others bulk out the dough with ground chalk, powdered bone, or even sawdust, stretching a little flour into a lot of profit. The result looks like bread, feels like bread, and technically feeds you, but it is a long way from anything you would want to build a life on. The milk is its own small horror. Carried into the city from tired, poorly kept cows, it is often watered down to increase the volume, then whitened back up with chalk or other additives to hide the dilution. By the time it reaches your cup, it has travelled through dirty streets in open containers, gathering whatever the air and the dust care to donate along the way. On a warm day it turns quickly, so a little something is sometimes added to mask the sourness. You drink it because it is what there is, and because the full truth of its journey is not something you can afford to dwell on before noon. Even the comforts are corrupted. Tea, that beloved ritual, is expensive, so used leaves are dried, dyed, and sold again, sometimes bulked out with the leaves of entirely different plants dressed up to look the part. Beer is watered and adjusted with bitter additives to hide the weakness. Sweets and pickles are brightened with colouring agents that are frankly alarming, some containing metals that no one should be anywhere near, let alone eating. There is no inspector to stop any of this, no label to warn you, and no easy way to tell an honest loaf from a poisoned one. You simply eat and hope and get on with your day. What makes it all so unsettling is how ordinary it is. Nobody is being singled out. This is not a con played on one unlucky soul, but the standard condition of nearly every meal for nearly everyone. The rich are cheated in fancier shops and the poor are cheated in cheaper ones, but cheated they both are, from the same basic impulse to stretch a profit as far as it will go. Trust in your food. That thing your own century takes so completely for granted simply does not exist here. Every bite is a quiet gamble, so you finish your questionable bread and your suspicious milk, feeling neither nourished nor poisoned, which counts as a win. You have survived breakfast. Around you the city is fully awake now, its workshops open, its streets busy, and among that bustle are the smallest workers of all, headed to a job so grim that it is worth pausing the jokes entirely. Because up above the rooftops, someone very young is being sent into the dark. Now let us talk about the children, because their story deserves to be told plainly. In Georgian towns, chimneys are narrow, sooty, and dangerous, and the cheapest way to clean them is to send a small child up inside them with a brush. These climbing boys, some as young as 5 or 6, are chosen precisely because they are tiny enough to fit. They climb in the dark, scraping their knees and elbows raw, breathing in soot that ruins their lungs, and sometimes they become stuck, or fall, or worse. There is no comedy here, only the quiet, uncomfortable truth that a great many comforts in this era were built on the suffering of the very young. These children are almost always poor, often orphans or the sons of families so desperate that a master sweep will take the child on as an apprentice in exchange for food, shelter of a sort, and the promise of a trade. In practice, the arrangement frequently means long hours, harsh treatment, and work that no adult would ever be asked to do. The child belongs more or less to the master, and the master is under little real obligation to treat him gently. Some are kind, many are not. The boy has no say in the matter, and nowhere else to go. The work itself is brutal in its details. A chimney might be no wider than the span of a small body, twisting and turning as it rises through the house, still warm or even hot from recent fires. The child climbs by, bracing his back against one side and his knees against the other, inching upward in the choking dark, one painful push at a time. The soot coats his skin, fills his eyes, and settles deep in his lungs. His knees and elbows are rubbed raw against the rough brick until over time they harden into calluses, a process the masters sometimes hurry along by cruel means. It is a childhood spent inside the walls, unseen and unheard. The dangers are constant and severe. A boy can become wedged in a narrow flue, unable to move up or down, and in the worst cases cannot be freed in time. He can lose his grip and fall the height of a house. He can be badly burned in a chimney lit too soon, or overcome by the smoke and fumes. And beyond the sudden accidents lies the slower harm, the lasting damage done to young lungs and growing bodies by years of breathing soot in the dark. Many do not live long lives. Those who survive often carry the marks of the work for the rest of their days. What makes this particular horror so hard to sit with is how accepted it is. The comfort of a clean, well-drawing fireplace in a warm parlour rests directly on the labour of a frightened child in the flue above. The family gathered by the hearth need never see him, need never think of him, and mostly do not. He is simply part of the machinery of a comfortable home, as unremarkable as the coal in the scuttle. Only later, as reformers begin to speak up and lawmakers slowly, reluctantly act, does the practice come under real challenge, and even then it takes decades and repeated laws before it is finally brought to an end. It is worth remembering these children, because they are so easily forgotten. They left few records and fewer choices, and the warmth they helped provide was enjoyed by people who rarely knew their names. As you stand in the busy street and watch a small, soot-blackened figure trudge behind his master to the next house, it is a sobering reminder of who paid the hidden price for Georgian comfort. And speaking of prices paid in health and suffering, if you should fall ill in this century, the person you turn to for help may do you more harm than the sickness ever could. You're feeling unwell, so naturally you seek out a physician, which in Georgian England is a bit like asking an arsonist to check your fireplace. The leading theory of medicine still holds that illness comes from an imbalance in the body, and the favoured fix is to remove some of you. That usually means bleeding, opening a vein, and draining your blood into a bowl until you feel suitably lightheaded and cured. If bleeding does not work, there is purging, blistering, and a cheerful menu of substances designed to make you vomit. You arrive sick and weak. You leave sicker and weaker, but at least you have been thoroughly expensively treated. The whole system rests on the old idea that the body is governed by 4 fluids, and that good health is simply a matter of keeping them in balance. When you fall ill, the reasoning goes, one of them must be in excess, and the obvious solution is to get rid of the surplus by any means available. It sounds almost tidy until you realise that the means available are all deeply unpleasant and none of them actually work. There are no germs in this picture, no understanding of infection, just a confident, elegant theory that happens to be entirely wrong and enthusiastically applied. Bleeding is the great favourite, the treatment reached for first and often. The physician opens a vein, usually in the arm, and lets your blood run into a basin, judging by eye and by tradition how much to take. For stubborn cases, leeches are applied, small and patient, drawing the blood out drop by drop. The theory says this restores balance. The reality is that it weakens an already struggling patient, and for someone genuinely sick, losing a quantity of blood is close to the last thing the body needs. Yet the patient often feels calmer afterward, faint and drowsy, and mistakes that dazed relief for the beginning of recovery. If bleeding is not enough, the physician turns to the rest of his arsenal. Purges are given to empty the bowels, emetics to force vomiting, and blistering agents to raise painful sores on the skin, all in the firm belief that driving the illness out through some exit or other must surely help. Mercury is prescribed with alarming freedom, a heavy metal that poisons as it treats, causing drooling, loosened teeth, and worse over time. The medicines are harsh, the logic is circular, and the poor patient is subjected to the lot, growing steadily more miserable with each expensive intervention. Getting well is largely a matter of surviving the treatment, and it is expensive, which adds insult to genuine injury. A proper physician charges proper fees, and for that money you receive confident diagnoses, learned Latin phrases and treatments that leave you worse off than before. The wealthy can afford to be bled and purged and dosed into a stupor by the finest men in the profession. The poor make do with cheaper practitioners, folk remedies, or simply riding the illness out at home, which, given the alternatives, is frequently the wiser choice. It is a rare and uncomfortable truth of the age that avoiding the doctor might be the healthiest decision you make. Recovery, when it comes, is credited entirely to the treatment, never to the body's own stubborn resilience. If you live, the physician is a genius. If you die, the illness was simply too strong. Either way, his reputation survives intact, ready for the next trembling patient. You stagger out of the consultation pale, drained, and several coins poorer, wondering whether you feel better or merely emptier, and as you run your tongue over your aching teeth, you remember there is one part of the body where Georgian care manages to be even more alarming than everywhere else. Open wide, because Georgian dentistry is a horror all its own. Sugar has arrived in Britain in enormous quantities, and the wealthy in particular are rotting their teeth at an astonishing rate. When the teeth finally fail, the fashionable solution is not a gentle false set, but a real, living tooth pulled from someone else's mouth and pushed into your own. The donors are the poor, who sell their healthy teeth for a few coins because they need the money more than the molars. The transplants rarely take, they often bring disease, and they almost always fail. But for a brief, glittering moment, a rich smile can be borrowed straight from the mouth of the desperate. The root of the problem, so to speak, is sugar. Once a rare luxury, it now pours into the country in vast quantities, sweetening the tea, the cakes, and the puddings of anyone who can afford it. The richer you are, the more sugar you eat, and so, in a strange reversal, rotten teeth become a mark of wealth. The poor, who cannot afford such treats, often keep their teeth in far better condition, which is exactly why their mouths become a resource for their so-called betters. There is a bitter irony in a fashion that quite literally rots the mouths of the rich and then repairs them using the teeth of the poor. When decay sets in, and it always does, the pain is enormous. There is no gentle drilling and filling here. The standard treatment for a bad tooth is to pull it out, and the pulling is done without anything worth calling pain relief. A tooth drawer grips the offending tooth with an iron instrument and wrenches, twisting and levering until it comes free, along with a good deal of screaming. The work is often done by barbers, blacksmiths, or travelling showmen who set up in the market square and yank teeth for a paying, wincing crowd. Precision is not the goal. Speed is. The transplant trade grows out of this misery. A wealthy patient who has lost a front tooth does not want an ugly gap on display, so a surgeon offers a startling remedy. A healthy tooth is pulled from the mouth of a poor donor, someone hungry enough to sell it, and pressed immediately into the fresh socket of the paying customer, then bound in place in the hope that it will take root. Sometimes, briefly it seems to. More often it loosens, blackens and fails, and worse, it can carry disease from one mouth directly into another, spreading infections through the very treatment meant to beautify. For the donors, it is a grim bargain born of need. To sell a tooth is to sell a piece of your own body for the price of a meal or two, enduring the same brutal extraction as any decayed tooth, only this time from a healthy, painful mouth. The buyers rarely think about where their new teeth came from, and the sellers rarely have the luxury of refusing. It is a small, quiet trade in human parts, conducted in the shadow of grand houses and elegant drawing rooms, and it captures something true about the age, that comfort at the top so often rested on sacrifice at the bottom. In time, better false teeth would come along, sets carved from bone, ivory, or the teeth of the dead gathered from battlefields, an improvement of sorts, though a macabre one. But for now, the fashionable smile is a fragile borrowed thing, aching and impermanent, held together by hope and binding thread. You close your mouth carefully around your own troublesome teeth and count yourself lucky to still have them. And when the pain of them grows too much to bear, there is, as always in this century, one universal remedy waiting on the shelf, one bottle that promises to make all of it stop hurting. Whatever ails you in Georgian England, there is one remedy for nearly everything, and it is opium. Sold openly and cheaply as a tincture called laudanum, it is dripped into wine or water and taken for pain, coughs, nerves, sadness, boredom, and simply getting through the day. It is not seen as dangerous, it is seen as sensible. Most troubling of all, Exhausted mothers and overwhelmed carers give opium-laced syrups to infants to keep them quiet and sleeping, with no idea of the harm being done. The bottles promise calm and comfort, and they deliver both, right up until the moment they deliver something far darker. This is one shadow the era never quite reckoned with. Laudanum is everywhere and available to everyone. There is no prescription required, no warning offered, and no real restriction on who may buy it or how much. It sits on the shelves of apothecaries and general shops alongside the everyday goods, cheap enough that even the poor can afford a dose, and it is reached for as casually as you might reach for a mild remedy today. A person in pain takes it and the pain fades. A person who cannot sleep takes it, and sleep comes. A person weighed down by hardship takes it, and, for a little while, the weight lifts. Its usefulness is real, which is exactly what makes it so difficult to see clearly. The trouble is that opium does not only soothe. Taken often, it takes hold, and the body comes to need it, so that stopping brings its own suffering. People who begin using it for a genuine complaint find themselves unable to do without it, taking more and more to reach the same relief, until the remedy has quietly become the master. This happens across every level of society, to the poor labourer and the respectable lady alike, and because the drug is so ordinary and so accepted, the slow slide into dependence often goes unremarked, mistaken for weakness or nerves rather than recognised for what it is. The hardest part to speak of is what happens to the youngest. Overworked mothers, many of them labouring long hours with no one to mind their children, turn to soothing syrup sold specifically to quiet, fretful infants. These medicines, marketed as gentle and safe, contain opium, and they work by dulling the child into sleep. For a desperate, exhausted parent with no other help, a quiet baby can feel like salvation. But an infant is fragile, and a dose that calms can very easily become a dose that harms. Children sicken, waste, and are lost to these syrups in numbers that would be unthinkable if anyone had understood what was truly in the bottle, and that is the crux of it. Almost no one understands. The dangers of opium, its grip and its toll, are not yet properly known, and the medicines are trusted precisely because they are sold openly and used by everyone. A mother reaching for a soothing syrup is not being careless. She's doing what her neighbours do, what her own mother did, what the shopkeeper and the advertisement assure her is perfectly safe. The harm is real, and the intentions are not cruel, and that gap between them is what makes this corner of the age so genuinely sorrowful to look back on. Only much later would the true cost be counted, the dependence, the deaths, the quiet damage done in countless homes by a remedy no one thought to fear. For now, the bottle sits on the shelf, ordinary and reassuring, promising rest to the weary and peace to the crying child. You look at it and feel the weight of everything it represents, comfort and danger bound together in the same small vial. It is a heavy note to sit with, so let us gently turn away from it and toward the noisier, gaudier, and frankly more ridiculous corner of Georgian medicine, where the only thing being poisoned is your purse. If real medicine will bleed you dry, and opium will send you to sleep, there is always the wonderful world of the quack. Georgian England is bursting with self-declared doctors selling miracle tonics, magnetic devices, electrical cures, and pills that claim to fix everything from baldness to broken hearts. They advertise in the newspapers with glowing testimonials, most of them invented, and they set up dazzling shows to draw a crowd. Some sell bottled water as a cure for gout. Others promise to restore youth, vigour, and romance with a single spoonful of something suspiciously brown. It costs you your savings and cures you of nothing. But the salesman does have a truly excellent hat. The quack thrives because real medicine is so terrible. When the honest physician offers you bleeding, purging, and a bill you cannot pay, the smiling stranger with the colourful bottle starts to look rather appealing. He does not threaten to drain you into a bowl. He promises health, happiness, and a full head of hair, all for a modest sum and a leap of faith. In a century desperate for relief and starved of real answers, that promise sells itself, and the quacks know it. They are not doctors. They are showmen who happen to work in symptoms. Their remedies are gloriously, dangerously inventive. There are pills said to contain secret ingredients from distant lands, tonics that are mostly gin with a bit of colouring, and powders that will supposedly cure fevers, agues, and a broken heart in one go. There are strange devices too. Metal rods and tractors claim to draw disease out of the body by mysterious force, and machines that deliver a mild electrical tingle sold as the very latest in scientific healing. None of it does what it claims. Some of it does nothing at all, which, given the alternatives, is arguably the safest possible outcome. The real genius lies in the marketing, and here the quacks are genuinely ahead of their time. They flood the newspapers with advertisements crammed with testimonials from grateful customers, nearly all of whom are entirely fictional. They give their potions grand names and hint at royal patronage they do not have. They stage public demonstrations, curing planted actors of pretend ailments before an amazed crowd, then selling their wares while the excitement is high. It is theatre dressed up as medicine, and it works beautifully, because people want so badly to believe that somewhere out there is a bottle that will finally make things better. Of course, the whole business is unregulated, which means anyone with confidence and a supply of empty bottles can set up as a healer. There is no license to earn, no standard to meet, and no one to stop a charlatan from selling coloured water to the dying. Some quacks grow genuinely rich, building fortunes and reputations on the hopes of the sick. A few of their remedies even become household names, trusted for generations despite doing nothing but part fools from their money. The line between medicine and fraud is not blurred here so much as cheerfully ignored. The tragedy under the comedy is that the desperate lose the most. A poor family spending its last coins on a miracle tonic for a dying relative gets no miracle, only an emptier purse and the same grief. But you cannot entirely blame them for trying, not when the trained physician offers only leeches and Latin. So you watch the showman work his crowd, admire the sheer audacity of it, and keep a firm hand on your own purse. And when you have had your fill of medicine both false and worse, you find your thoughts turning, as they so often do in this century, to the smallest and most vulnerable of all, the babies whose care is handed to strangers for a fee. Among the fashionable, feeding your own baby is considered rather beneath you, so the work is handed to a wet nurse. A woman paid to nurse and raise an infant in her own home, often far out in the countryside. For the wealthy mother, it means freedom and status. For the baby, it means being sent away from home in its very first weeks into a household of strangers, with survival far from guaranteed. Some nurses are loving and careful, others take on more infants than they can possibly manage. It is a quiet, everyday arrangement, spoken of as perfectly normal, that carries a weight the era rarely paused to measure. The reasoning behind it says a great deal about the age. A fashionable lady is expected to return quickly to society after a birth, to attend her dinners and her dances and her endless round of visits, and the demands of feeding a baby simply do not fit that life. There is a belief, too, that nursing is coarse work, unsuited to a woman of refinement. And so the newborn is handed to a hired woman, and the mother returns to her drawing room, the whole exchange treated as sensible household management rather than anything to grieve over. The baby is provided for. The lady is free. Everyone on paper is satisfied. The wet nurse is usually a working woman who has recently had a child of her own, and who can earn much needed money by nursing another. In the better arrangements, she takes the infant into her cottage, feeds and tends it with genuine care, and raises it more or less as her own for a year or two before it is returned to a family it has never really known. A kind nurse can give a child warmth and attention. Its birth mother, caught up in society, might never have offered. When the match is good, the arrangement works, and the child thrives in humble surroundings, far from the grand house it was born into. But the system has a darker edge, and it shows most clearly where money and desperation meet. Some nurses, poor themselves and eager for income, take on more infants than any one woman could properly feed and tend. The babies compete for too little milk and too little attention, and in crowded, struggling households, the youngest and weakest do not always survive. Distance makes it worse. A mother miles away in the city cannot see how her child is faring, cannot check the conditions, cannot know whether the reassuring letters match the reality. She trusts, and sometimes that trust is misplaced. What makes it so sobering is not cruelty but casualness. Sending a newborn away to be raised by a stranger is not seen as a hard or painful choice. It is simply what is done, as ordinary as hiring a cook or a maid. The emotional cost to the child separated from its family in its earliest, most fragile days is scarcely considered, because the age does not yet think in those terms. The bond between mother and infant that your own century treats as precious is here quietly outsourced, its risks accepted as the natural order of things. Not every story ends in sorrow, and many children came home healthy to families glad to have them. But the arrangement rested on a fragile hope that a paid stranger, far away and unwatched, would care for a baby as if it were her own, and hope is a thin thing to build an infant's life upon. You think of those small travellers, carried off to distant cottages in their first weeks, and you feel the weight of it. And for the children with no family at all to arrange even this, there is one last refuge in the city, a place built for the babies nobody could keep. In the heart of London stands a hospital built for the babies no one can keep, the children of mothers too poor, too desperate, or too shamed to raise them. Bringing a baby here is not an act of cruelty but of heartbreak, a last hope that the child might live a life the mother cannot provide. Each baby is left with a small token, a coin, a ribbon, a scrap of cloth, so that one day, if fortune ever allows, the mother might return and claim her child by matching it. Most never come back. The tokens remain, a drawer full of tiny, silent goodbyes, each one its own quiet tragedy. The hospital exists because the alternative is so much worse. Before it opened, infants born to mothers with no means and no husband had almost nowhere to turn, and too many were abandoned in the streets, left to the cold and the indifference of a hard city. A charitable founder, moved by the sight of dying children in the gutters, spent years campaigning to build a place that would take them in, feed them, and give them a chance at survival. It is an act of genuine mercy in an age not overburdened with it, a rare institution built not to punish the poor, but to catch the smallest of them before they fall. Still, the need far outstrips the space, and so admission becomes its own painful ordeal. There are more babies than the hospital can possibly take, and mothers arrive in numbers that break the heart, each one hoping her child will be among the chosen. For a time, places are decided by lottery, a mother drawing a ball from a bag to learn whether her baby will be admitted, turned away, or held in reserve. Imagine standing there, your child in your arms, your future decided by the colour of a ball-drawn blind. It is a cruel necessity born of a shortage of kindness, not a lack of it. The tokens are the part that lingers longest in the mind. A mother giving up her baby is asked to leave some small identifying object, so that if her circumstances ever change, she might return and prove the child is hers. And so she leaves what little she has, a single coin, sometimes bent or inscribed, a scrap of ribbon or printed fabric torn from her own clothing, a button, a bead, a folded note. These humble things are recorded and kept, each one attached to a child, each one representing a mother who could not stay, but could not bear to leave nothing at all. They are among the most moving objects the century produced. For most, the return never comes. Life for the poor is precarious and unforgiving, and the change in fortune that would allow a mother to reclaim her child rarely arrives. The children grow up within the institution, given a new name, an education of sorts, and a trade, cared for far better than the streets would have managed, but without the family they were born to. Some go on to steady lives, others do not, and in the records, beside so many of them, sits a token never redeemed, a small object that was meant to reunite a family, and instead became the only trace one ever left of the other. It is impossible to walk past those tokens, even in memory, without feeling the human weight pressed into each one. They are not artifacts of cruelty, but of love under impossible pressure, the last gift of mothers who gave up their children in the hope that giving them up was the only way to save them. You carry that thought quietly with you, and when you're ready to lift your eyes from it, the city offers, as it so often does, a spectacle of a very different and far more troubling kind, one where suffering is not hidden away but put on show. On a free afternoon, some Georgians go looking for entertainment, and one popular destination is a hospital for the mentally ill known to all as Bedlam. For a small fee, visitors are let in to wander the wards and look at the patients, to point, to laugh, and to treat human suffering as a kind of theatre. It is considered an ordinary outing, no stranger than visiting a menagerie. There is nothing amusing in it now, and there was nothing amusing in it then, only vulnerable people put on display for the amusement of the comfortable. It is a reminder of how easily an age can be blind to its own cruelty. The hospital itself is a grand building, its imposing front designed to impress, its purpose to house those the age has no other idea what to do with. Understanding of mental illness is almost non-existent. There are no real treatments, no compassionate framework, only confinement, restraint, and a set of harsh, mistaken theories about what ails the people held inside. The patients are among the most defenceless human beings in the whole of Georgian society, unwell, often frightened, and entirely at the mercy of their keepers, and it is these people that the paying public comes to see. The practice grows out of a mix of curiosity, ignorance, and the belief that the sights within might serve as entertainment or even moral instruction. Visitors stroll the corridors as though visiting an attraction, peering at the patients in their cells, remarking on their behaviour, sometimes provoking them for a reaction. A few come with genuine concern, perhaps to visit a relative or to offer charity. But many come simply to gawk, to be shocked or amused, treating the distress of the sick as a show laid on for their afternoon. That people saw nothing wrong in this is itself part of the horror. For the patients, there is no dignity in any of it. To be unwell is hard enough. To be unwell, confined, and then displayed to strangers who stare and mock is a cruelty layered upon a cruelty. They have no privacy, no say, and no escape from the eyes of the crowd. The conditions inside are grim by any measure, the care crude, the understanding absent, and the constant traffic of curious onlookers only deepens the indignity. These are human beings reduced to curiosities, their worst moments turned into a spectacle for people who will go home to warm suppers and think no more of it. In time, attitudes begin to shift. Reformers grow uneasy, then appalled, and the notion of allowing the public to wander in and view the patients comes to be seen for the cruelty it is, the open visiting is eventually stopped, and slowly, over many years, ideas about how the mentally ill should be treated begin to change, though real reform is a long and halting road. That it took so long to recognise such an obvious wrong is a sobering thought, and a caution against assuming that any age, including one's own, sees all its own cruelties clearly. It is worth pausing on this one, because it asks something of us. It is easy to laugh at powdered wigs and dubious bread, but here the comedy stops entirely. The people of Bedlam were owed care and given a circus instead, and remembering them plainly is the least that later centuries can offer. You turn away from those cold corridors with a heavier heart than you arrived with, and yet the Georgian appetite for spectacle does not end at the hospital gates, for the city has another crowd gathering elsewhere, drawn by an event even grimmer and even more popular. Some mornings the whole city empties toward a single spot, because today there is a hanging, and a hanging is an event. Crowds line the route. Vendors sell food and printed ballads about the condemned, and families bring children to get a good view. The procession from the prison to the gallows can take hours, with the crowd cheering, jeering, or weeping depending on the prisoner's reputation. To modern eyes it is grotesque, a death turned into a festival. To Georgian eyes it is justice, warning, and free entertainment all rolled into one long grim afternoon. You stand in the crush, and you begin to understand just how differently this world sees death. The day has a rhythm everyone knows. The condemned are brought out from the prison and set upon a cart for the long, slow journey through the streets to the gallows at Tyburn. The route is lined with spectators, thousands upon thousands of them, packed into windows, perched on walls and jostling for position along the way. It is treated as a public holiday of sorts, a break from labour, an occasion. Apprentices are given time off, taverns do a roaring trade, the whole city turns out to watch a handful of people die, and it does so with an appetite that is genuinely hard to comprehend from a gentler age. The condemned themselves are the stars of this terrible show, and the crowd's mood toward them varies wildly. A notorious robber with a dashing reputation might be cheered like a hero, showered with flowers, urged to make a bold speech. A poisoner or a killer of the helpless might be pelted and cursed every step of the way. The prisoners know this, and many play to it, dressing in their finest clothes, ride into their deaths with defiant swagger, determined to make a good end before the watching multitude. A brave performance on the cart could win a kind of grim immortality in the ballads sold afterward, and the ballads are everywhere. Enterprising printers produce cheap sheets telling the life, crimes and supposed last words of the condemned, hawked through the crowd before the person has even died. There are pies and drinks for sale, pickpockets working the distracted throng, and a general carnival atmosphere sitting uneasily atop the fact that someone is about to be killed. At the gallows, the noose is fixed, the cart is drawn away, and the crowd surges and roars. Death by this method is rarely quick or merciful, and the watchers see all of it, then drift home to their suppers as though from any other day out. What unsettles the modern mind most is not the execution itself, but the festivity around it. The sense that a public killing is a fine way to spend an afternoon. The authorities intend the spectacle as a deterrent, a vivid warning of what happens to those who break the law. But the crowd does not always read it that way. For many it is simply theatre, thrilling and free, and the deterrent effect is doubtful at best. Reformers begin to argue that turning death into entertainment coarsens everyone who watches, and eventually the public procession to Tyburn is ended, the executions moved, and much later, hidden from public view altogether. For now, though, the gallows stand in the open and the crowds keep coming. You find yourself pressed among them, uneasy and unable to look away, part of a mass of ordinary people who see nothing strange in any of this. It is a stark window into how far attitudes toward death and punishment have travelled. And the grim business does not always end when the prisoner does, for in the very worst cases the punishment is designed to continue long after death, out on the lonely roads beyond the city. For the very worst crimes, death is not the end of the punishment. The bodies of certain executed criminals are coated, bound in iron, and hung from a tall post at a crossroads or along a busy road, left to swing there for months or even years. This is called gibbeting, and its purpose is to terrify. Travellers pass beneath the creaking iron cage. Birds circle overhead, and the message is impossible to miss. This is what happens to those who break the law most terribly. It is horrifying, deliberate, and entirely legal. And somehow, over time, people learn to walk past it, as if it were merely part of the scenery. The practice is reserved for crimes the age considers especially heinous, murder above all, along with certain other offences judged to demand a punishment that outlasts life itself. An ordinary hanging ends with a burial. Gibbeting denies even that. The body is treated to slow the decay, then locked into a specially made iron frame, a cage of bands and hoops shaped to hold a human form, and hoisted high on a post in a prominent public place. There it stays, exposed to the weather and the crows, a landmark of dread that everyone in the district comes to know. The chosen sites are always public and deliberate. A gibbet is raised near the scene of the crime, or beside a well-travelled road, or on high ground where it can be seen for miles. The point is visibility. This is punishment as billboard, a warning aimed not at the dead man, who is beyond caring, but at every living person who passes and looks up. The authorities want the sight burned into memory, want travellers to carry the image home and think twice before straying towards serious crime. Whether it actually deterred anyone is doubtful, but the intention is plain enough. For those who live nearby, the gibbet becomes a grim and permanent neighbour. The iron creaks and groans in the wind, a sound people learn to recognise and unsettlingly to ignore. Children grow up knowing the shape on the hill. Local landmarks and place names attach themselves to the spot. Some are frightened of it, avoiding the road after dark. Others grow so accustomed to it that it fades into the background of daily life, a horror rendered ordinary by sheer familiarity. That is perhaps the strangest part, how the truly monstrous can become, with time, merely another feature of the landscape. There is a whole grim folklore that grows up around these sites. Tales are told of the crime that led to each one, of ghosts and ill omens, of the desperate relatives who sometimes tried to take a body down under cover of night for a proper burial, an act the law strictly forbade. The gibbet stood at the meeting point of justice, superstition, and public spectacle, a place where the state's power over the body extended past the grave and into a kind of endless iron-bound display. It is punishment stretched to its cruelest logical end. In time, this too fades away, the practice abandoned as tastes and sensibilities slowly change, and the appetite for such displays wanes. The posts come down, the cages rust away in storehouses, and the roads grow quiet again. But for the length of the Georgian age, the gibbet is a real and accepted sight. A hanging body in chains treated as an unremarkable part of the journey between towns. You hurry past one on the road, collar turned up against the creak of the wind in the iron, and you're glad to leave it behind you. Yet not every corpse in this century is left in plain view, for some are wanted badly enough that people will dig through the earth in the dark to steal them. Under cover of darkness, in the corners of graveyards, a grim trade is quietly booming. The growing schools of anatomy need bodies to teach on, and the law does not supply nearly enough, so a market rises to meet the demand. Body snatchers, known politely as resurrection men, dig up the freshly buried and sell them to surgeons for dissection. Grieving families take to guarding graves, building iron cages over coffins, and burying their dead deeper to protect them. To be poor in this era is to fear not only a hard death, but a stolen grave. The living struggle to survive, and even the dead are not allowed to rest. The whole ghastly business springs from a simple mismatch. The study of the human body is advancing, and surgeons and their students need real corpses to learn on, to understand how the body is built and how to repair it. But the law allows only a small, steady trickle of legally obtained bodies, nowhere near enough to meet the hunger of the anatomy schools. Where there is demand and short supply, a market always appears, and here the market deals in the dead. It is illegal, disreputable, and, for those willing to do it, quietly profitable. The resurrection men work by night, and they work with unpleasant efficiency. A fresh grave is the target, for a recently buried body is worth the most. They dig down at one end, break open the coffin, and draw the body out, often taking care to leave the shroud and any belongings behind, since stealing the corpse alone carries a lesser penalty than stealing property. The grave is then tidied to hide the disturbance, and the body is carried off to be sold before dawn. A skilled gang can empty a grave in a fraction of the time you might expect, vanishing into the dark with their terrible cargo. For families, the fear this creates is real and cruel. To bury a loved one is hard enough without the added dread that the body might be stolen within days for the dissecting table. So the living take defensive measures, and a strange industry of grave protection springs up alongside the grave robbing. Heavy iron cages are fixed over graves. Bodies are buried deeper or in reinforced coffins, or watched over through the vulnerable first nights by relatives keeping cold vigil in the churchyard. The poor, who cannot afford such protections, are the most at risk, their graves the easiest targets of all. The trade also breeds worse things. Where bodies are worth money, the temptation arises to supply them by any means, and there are notorious cases of individuals who move from robbing graves to darker crimes still, ensuring a fresh supply rather than waiting for one. These horrors, when they come to light, shock the public deeply and force the question of how such a market was ever allowed to grow. The answer lies in that original mismatch, the law's refusal to provide bodies honestly, which pushed the whole grim need underground and into the hands of the resurrection men. Eventually the law is changed, allowing anatomy schools a more honest and adequate supply, and the dark trade in stolen corpses withers away. But for a long stretch of the Georgian age, the fear of the body snatcher is a genuine part of grief, and the churchyard at night is a place of real dread. You pull your coat tight and give the graveyard a wide berth as you pass, and it is worth remembering that many of those most at risk of ending up on the dissecting table were the same poor souls the law treated most harshly in life, for this was an age when the smallest crimes could carry the very largest penalty. Georgian law does not believe in half measures. Under a sprawling system later known as the Bloody Code, the number of crimes punishable by death climbs into the hundreds. Murder, of course, but also stealing goods worth a few shillings, poaching a rabbit, cutting down a tree or picking pocket. A hungry child who takes bread and a hardened killer can, in theory, face the very same rope. The idea is that terror will keep the poor in line. In practice, juries often refuse to convict, and judges quietly bend the rules, because even in this harsh age, hanging a person for the price of a handkerchief unsettles almost everyone who watches it happen. The logic behind it, such as it is, rests on fear. With little in the way of an organised police force and no real system of prisons for long sentences, those who make the laws reach for the bluntest tool they have, the threat of death. If the punishment for even minor theft is severe enough, the thinking goes, no one will dare to steal. So offence after offence is made a capital crime, the list growing over the decades until it covers a startling range of acts, many of them small and born of simple poverty. It is deterrence by terror, an attempt to protect property with the gallows, and it is property that the code is really about. A great many of the capital offences concern theft, damage, or trespass against the belongings of those who have belongings to protect. Take goods above a certain modest value and you can hang. Poach game from a wealthy man's land and you can hang. Damage his property, forge his documents, or pick his pocket, and the rope awaits. The law falls hardest on the poor, who steal because they are hungry or desperate, while the comfortable classes it protects sleep a little easier behind its shadow. It is a system that treats a purse as roughly equal to a life, yet the code is so harsh that it half defeats itself. Faced with a frightened, half-starved defendant accused of a small theft, jurors frequently balk at sending them to their deaths, and so they bend the truth to save a life. A jury might value stolen goods at just under the amount that would trigger hanging, knowing full well the true worth was higher, a merciful fiction that spares the neck while satisfying the letter of the law. Judges, too, find ways to soften the outcome, and many condemned prisoners have their sentences reduced to transportation or imprisonment. The severity on paper is rarely matched in full by the deaths in practice. Even so, people do hang for small crimes, and the shadow of the gallows falls across countless minor offences. The uncertainty is part of the cruelty. A poor person who steals to survive cannot know whether they will be shown mercy or made an example, whether the jury will save them or the judge will let the sentence stand. The law dangles death over petty acts and then applies it unevenly, which is arguably worse than applying it consistently, for it turns justice into a lottery played with people's lives. Terror, it turns out, is a poor foundation for fairness. In the end, reformers come to see the whole system as both cruel and ineffective, and the long list of capital crimes is gradually cut back until only the gravest offences remain punishable by death. But that reform lies in the future, and for now you live in a world where a handkerchief taken in a moment of need might, with terrible bad luck, cost you everything. It is a sobering thing to hold in mind as you move through the city, and not every punishment ends at the gallows, for the age has a whole repertoire of penalties designed less to kill you than to humiliate you before the entire watching crowd. Not every punishment ends in death. Some are designed purely to shame. In the pillory, a wooden frame clamps your head and hands in place in a public square, leaving you helpless before the crowd for hours. What happens next depends entirely on that crowd's mood. If they pity you, they leave you alone. If they despise you, they pelt you with rotten food, mud, dead animals, and worse, and there is nothing you can do but stand there and endure it. For some prisoners it is a mild embarrassment. For others it turns deadly, as the mob's fury goes far beyond anything the sentence intended. Justice here is loud, physical, and entirely public. The device itself is simple and brutal in its simplicity. A wooden post supports a hinged board with holes cut for the neck and wrists, and once you're locked into it, you cannot move, cannot shield your face, cannot even sit down. You are fixed there, bent forward, on display in the busiest, most public place available for a set number of hours. The whole point is exposure. You're not hidden away in a cell, but held up before your community as a wrongdoer, forced to bear the judgment of everyone who passes. The shame is meant to be the sentence. But the pillory is never only about shame, because the crowd rarely settles for merely looking. Onlookers come armed with whatever unpleasant things are to hand, and the person in the pillory becomes a target. Rotten vegetables and fruit, Mud, filth from the gutters, dead cats and rats, even stones are hurled at the helpless prisoner. Unable to move or protect themselves, they simply have to take it hour after hour, while the crowd works itself into a frenzy of jeering and throwing. It is participatory punishment, the public invited not just to witness the penalty, but to inflict a good part of it themselves. The outcome depends enormously on who you are and what you did. A popular figure punished for something the crowd sympathises with might be treated gently, even cheered and protected. The pillory turned into a strange sort of triumph. But a prisoner the mob despises, someone convicted of a crime that arouses real public hatred, faces something far more dangerous. The barrage can become savage, the missiles heavier and better aimed, and there are cases where prisoners were so badly assaulted in the pillory that they did not survive it. A sentence meant to humiliate could, with an angry enough crowd, become a sentence of death delivered by the public's own hands. That unpredictability is precisely what makes the pillory so cruel. The court sets the punishment, but the crowd decides its true severity, and the prisoner has no way of knowing in advance which crowd they will face. Two people given the very same sentence might have wildly different experiences, one walking away merely muddy and mortified, the other carried off gravely hurt. The state, in effect, hands part of its power to punish over to the whims of a mob, and then looks away from whatever follows. It is justice outsourced to the mood of the street. Over time, this too comes to seem barbaric, and the pillory falls out of use as attitudes shift toward punishments less dependent on the cruelty of a crowd. But throughout the Georgian age it stands in the public squares, a familiar fixture, and being sentenced to it is a real and frightening prospect. You give the occupied pillory a wide berth, unwilling to join a crowd in that particular sport. And if public shame is one way the age deals with wrongdoers, there is another that traps people just as surely, though it involves no crowd at all, only high walls, locked gates, and the simple misfortune of owing money you cannot repay. Fall into debt in Georgian England and you can be locked away for it, which raises the obvious question of how you're meant to earn the money to get out. Debtors' prisons hold people not for stealing or violence, but simply for owing money they cannot pay. Families sometimes move in with the prisoner, children grow up behind the walls, and inmates must pay the jailers for food, bedding, and even the privilege of lighter chains. The wealthier debtor lives in relative comfort. The poorer one may quite literally starve. It is a system that punishes poverty with more poverty, and the only reliable way out is to somehow find the very money that landed you there. The trap is beautifully, maddeningly circular. A person who cannot pay their debts is imprisoned until they do, but imprisonment strips away their ability to work, to trade, to earn a single penny toward what they owe. So they sit, and the debt does not shrink, and the way out recedes further with every passing month. The only escape is for the debt to be paid, whether by the prisoner scraping together funds through some outside help, by friends or family covering it, or by the creditor eventually giving up. Until then, the gates stay shut, and the arithmetic of the situation makes no sense whatsoever. Inside, the prison runs on a grim economy of its own. The jailers are not paid enough to run the place decently, so they make their living by charging the prisoners directly for food, for a bed, for blankets, for the smallest comforts, even for lighter irons. This means that a debtor's experience of prison depends entirely on how much money they can still lay hands on. A prisoner with some funds or generous friends might rent a tolerable room, eat reasonably, and pass the time in relative ease. A prisoner with nothing is thrown into the worst of it, cold, hungry, and dependent on charity to avoid starving outright behind the walls. the presence of whole families makes it stranger and sadder still. Because a debtor might be held for years, some bring their wives and children in to live alongside them rather than be separated, and children are born and raised within the prison walls knowing no other home. Others come and go, working outside to support the imprisoned parent within, carrying food and news through the gates. The prison becomes a kind of grim community, a walled-off pocket of the city populated not by hardened criminals, but by the unlucky, the mismanaged, and the simply poor, along with the families who will not abandon them. What is so telling is that this is not really about crime at all. The debtors have hurt no one, stolen nothing, harmed nobody. Their offence is misfortune, a failed venture, a run of bad luck, an inability to keep pace with what they owe. Yet the age treats that misfortune as something close to a crime, locking the unfortunate away, and in doing so, guaranteeing they can never make things right. It reveals a hard truth about the century, that poverty itself was often regarded as a kind of guilt, and the poor were made to answer for it. In time, the cruelty and pointlessness of imprisoning people for debt comes to be widely recognised, and reform slowly dismantles the worst of the system. But for the length of the Georgian age, the debtor's prison stands as a real and looming threat, a place where a spell of bad fortune can swallow years of a life. You think of the families behind those walls, waiting for a sum that never comes, and you are grateful for a world that treats a debt as a problem to be solved rather than a sin to be caged. And yet, of all the ways this century could take a person's freedom without warning, there is one that needs no debt and no crime at all, only the bad luck of being young, able-bodied and in the wrong place when the Navy comes looking for men. You're walking home from the tavern when a group of tough armed men surrounds you, and just like that your future is decided. During times of war, the Royal Navy is desperate for sailors, and when volunteers run short it simply takes them. Press gangs roam the ports and streets, seizing able-bodied men and hauling them aboard ships bound for years of brutal service far from home. There is no warning, no goodbye, and often no way to send word to your family who may never learn what became of you. One moment you're an ordinary man on an ordinary night, the next you belong to the sea. The reasoning is coldly practical. A navy at war needs enormous numbers of men to crew its ships, and life at sea is so hard, so dangerous and so poorly paid that not nearly enough volunteer. So the state grants itself the power to make up the difference by force. Under this system of impressment, officers are authorised to see suitable men and put them to work aboard ship, whether they wish it or not. It is legal, it is organised, and it is one of the great open secrets of the age, a form of state kidnapping dressed up in the language of naval necessity. The press gang is the sharp end of this system, and it does its work with brisk efficiency. A party of sailors led by an officer moves through a port town, eyes out for likely men, and the ideal targets are those already used to the sea, sailors from merchant ships, fishermen, watermen, anyone with the strength and skill the Navy craves. But in a pinch, almost any fit man might do. They corner their quarry in the streets, the taverns, the alleys near the docks, and take him, using persuasion where it works and force where it does not. Resistance is met with clubs, and once you're taken, you are taken. For the man seized, it is a catastrophe that arrives without warning. There is no chance to settle affairs, to say farewell, to arrange for those who depend on him. He is simply gone, swallowed into the Navy, and his family is left to wonder and to manage without him. He may be at sea for years, in constant danger from storm, disease and battle, with wages that arrive late if they arrive at all. Wives lose husbands, children lose fathers, and businesses lose the workers who ran them, all at the whim of a press gang on a dark night. The grief it causes ripples out through whole communities. There are supposed to be limits and protections, certain men exempted from the press by their trade or their standing, and papers that could shield the holder from seizure. But in the heat of a manhunt, these rules are often ignored, exemptions brushed aside, papers disregarded, and the wrong men taken along with the right. Towns come to dread the arrival of the press gang, and there are riots, rescues, and pitched battles as communities fight to protect their own. It is a system that pits the needs of the state against the freedom of the individual, and the individual, more often than not, loses. In time, as the Great Wars end and attitudes change, the press gang fades into memory, remembered as one of the harsher intrusions of the state into ordinary life. But for now, in a country at war, no fit man near the coast is entirely safe, and a walk home can end aboard a ship bound for the far side of the world. You keep to the well-lit streets and away from the docks after dark. And if the press gang settles disputes between the state and the citizen with brute force, the gentlemen of the age have their own violent way of settling quarrels between themselves, one governed by elaborate rules and deadly serious pride. Among gentlemen, honour is a fragile and dangerous thing. An insult at a card table, a rude remark about a lady, or a bruised bit of pride can all lead to the same conclusion: a challenge, a chosen dawn, and two men standing in a quiet field with pistols. The rules are elaborate and solemn, the seconds carefully arranged, the whole affair treated as a matter of deep principle. And yet the outcome is often absurd: two grown men risking death over a spilled drink or a careless word. Duelling is technically against the law, but among the fashionable it is quietly expected, because in this world a reputation is somehow worth more than a life. To understand the duel, you have to understand how much the age prizes honour among its gentlemen. A man of standing is expected to defend his name and dignity against any slight, and to fail to do so is to be branded a coward, a fate many consider worse than death itself. So when one gentleman insults another, whether over cards, politics, a woman, or some trivial matter blown out of all proportion, the offended party issues a challenge, and the machinery of the duel grinds into motion. Backing down is rarely an option once pride is engaged, and pride, in this world, is engaged remarkably easily. The process is bound by an intricate code, followed with almost religious seriousness. Each man appoints a second, a trusted friend who handles the arrangements, and importantly, tries to negotiate a peaceful resolution before matters go further. The seconds agree on the time, the place, the weapons, and the exact conditions of the encounter. Pistols become the fashionable choice, though swords have their place, and everything is done with formal courtesy, as though the polite rituals could somehow soften the fact that the whole exercise is designed to let two men shoot at each other. There is something deeply strange in the elaborate manners wrapped around a potential killing. On the appointed morning, the parties meet at some secluded spot, a field or a heath at the edge of town chosen for privacy, since the law frowns on the whole affair. The men take their positions, the distance is measured, and on the signal they fire. Sometimes both miss, whether by poor aim or by deliberate choice, and honour is declared satisfied, allowing everyone to go home alive. Sometimes one man is wounded, and sometimes killed, and a quarrel over a trifle ends with a corpse in the grass and a survivor who may face consequences, though gentlemen are often treated leniently by courts sympathetic to the code. The absurdity of it is hard to overstate. Men of intelligence and standing, with everything to live for, gamble their lives over insults that a moment's patience would render meaningless. A careless word, a misunderstood glance, a dispute over a card game, any of these can end in gunfire at dawn. And yet within the logic of the age, it makes a grim kind of sense, because a gentleman's whole position rests on his honour, and a stain on that honour threatens everything he is. To refuse the duel is to lose the very thing the duel is meant to protect. Eventually, duelling comes to seem as ridiculous to society as it looks to modern eyes, and it fades away under the weight of changing attitudes and firmer laws. But throughout the Georgian age it persists, a deadly theatre of pride played out in quiet fields, and a hot word in the wrong company can genuinely cost a man his life. You resolve to guard your tongue in fashionable company. And if the gentlemen amuse themselves with elaborate violence against one another, the wider public has coarser entertainment still, spectacles of cruelty that draw roaring crowds and turn suffering into sport. When Georgians want excitement, they often find it in cruelty to animals. Crowds gather to watch bulls set upon by dogs, bears chained and baited, and cockerels fitted with sharp blades to fight to the death, with money-changing hands on every outcome. These spectacles are wildly popular across every level of society, from the roughest tavern yard to the tables of wealthy gamblers. The noise is deafening, the betting furious, the suffering total. It is entertainment, plain and simple, and almost no one questions it. Standing at the edge of that roaring, jostling crowd, you begin to see just how ordinary this casual brutality has become, and how far the world has since travelled. These pastimes are woven into the fabric of everyday life, not hidden away as shameful but enjoyed openly as popular fun. There are dedicated pits and rings for the purpose, and the events draw crowds from every walk of life. A labourer and a lord might stand shoulder to shoulder at the same contest, united by the thrill and the wager. Fairs, holidays, and ordinary afternoons all provide occasion for it, and the calendar of amusements is dotted with these bloody spectacles. To object to them would strike most people as odd, even humourless, for this is simply what entertainment looks like here. The forms of it are varied and grim. In one, a tethered animal is set upon by dogs while spectators cheer and bet on the outcome. In another, birds are made to fight one another, fitted with sharp spurs to make the contest quicker and bloodier, in a pit surrounded by shouting, wagering men. There is nothing subtle about any of it. The appeal lies precisely in the violence, the spectacle of one creature pitted against others, and the crowd's excitement rises with the ferocity of the struggle. The animals, of course, have no say and no escape, and their suffering is the entire point of the show. Gambling is the engine that drives it all. Money changes hands constantly, wagers laid on which animal will prevail, and the stakes can be considerable. This is where much of the passion comes from, for the crowd is not merely watching but betting, its fortunes rising and falling with each turn of the contest. The mix of blood and money produces a fevered atmosphere, loud and frantic, and the events become as much about the gambling as the animals themselves. A man might win or lose a good deal in an afternoon, all of it hanging on the outcome of a brutal little battle in the pit below. What is most striking looking back is the sheer absence of unease. The cruelty is not something people wrestle with or feel obliged to justify. It is simply accepted, an unremarkable feature of the age's amusements, no more questioned than a modern sporting fixture. That so many people could take such open pleasure in the suffering of animals without apparent troubling of conscience says a great deal about how differently this world weighs such things. It is not that Georgians are uniquely wicked, but that the idea of animal welfare as we understand it has barely begun to form. That idea does eventually take hold, and as sensibilities shift, these blood sports come under growing criticism and are at last outlawed, marking a real change in how society regards the treatment of animals. But throughout the Georgian age they flourish, popular and unquestioned, a roaring corner of everyday life. You edge away from the noise of the pit, unwilling to join the crowd's enthusiasm. And when the amusements of the town grow wearying, there is always the road out of it, though the open road in this century carries dangers of a sharper and more sudden kind. Travel between towns in Georgian England and you take your life and your purse in your hands. The roads are lonely, poorly policed, and haunted by highwaymen, mounted robbers who stop coaches at pistol point and relieve passengers of their money and valuables. Popular ballads romanticize them as dashing, polite gentlemen of the road, but the reality is far grimmer. A frightening encounter that can turn violent in a heartbeat. Passengers hide their coins in their boots, sew jewels into their coats, and pray the journey passes without incident. Every rattling mile through the dark countryside carries the same quiet question. Is that shape on the horizon another traveller or the end of your evening? The roads themselves invite the danger. They run for long stretches through open country, heath and woodland, far from any town or help, and there is no proper force to patrol them. A traveller on such a road is isolated and exposed, and a mounted robber who knows the ground can strike quickly and vanish just as fast. The stagecoaches that carry passengers and goods between towns make especially tempting targets, laden with people who often carry money and valuables for their journeys. Where there are rich pickings and little protection, robbers gather, and the highwayman becomes a genuine hazard of Georgian travel. The robbery itself is a tense and dangerous affair. The highwayman waits along the route, then rides out to block the coach, pistol drawn, and issues his demand for the passengers to hand over their money and goods. The travellers, frightened and unarmed, usually comply, surrendering their purses, watches and jewels rather than risk their lives. Some robbers are indeed courteous, playing the part of the polished gentleman thief the ballads celebrate, but many are not, and the threat of violence is always present. A robbery could turn deadly in an instant if a passenger resisted or a robber panicked, and the pistol pointed through the coach window is no stage prop. Travellers develop their little tricks to protect what they can. Coins are hidden in boots or sewn into the lining of clothes, valuables tucked into hidden pockets or disguised among ordinary belongings. Some carry a small amount of money openly, ready to be surrendered, in the hope that the robber will be satisfied and not search further for the rest. It is a nervous game of concealment, played out on every long journey, and there is no guarantee it will work. A determined highwayman who suspects more is hidden may search, and the traveller can only hope the ruse holds. The strange thing is the glamour that attaches to these robbers in the popular imagination. In songs and stories, the highwayman is dashing and bold, a romantic outlaw who robs with a flourish and a smile, and a few real robbers achieve a kind of celebrity, their exploits and their eventual capture followed avidly by the public. This romance sits oddly against the reality, which is that highway robbery is a frightening crime that leaves travellers shaken and sometimes hurt, and its practitioners, when caught, face the full weight of the law. The ballad and the pistol tell very different stories about the same man. As the age wears on, better roads, mounted patrols and changing times gradually make the highwayman's trade too risky to sustain, and the figure fades from the roads into legend. But for a long stretch of the Georgian era, the danger is real, and a journey through the countryside carries a genuine edge of fear. You settle into your coach seat and watch the darkening hedgerows warily. At least the open road, for all its perils, offers fresh air, which is more than can be said for the cities you're travelling between, where the very sky has taken on a colour it was never meant to have. Take a deep breath of Georgian city air, then immediately regret it. As towns grow and coal fires burn in every home and workshop, the sky above the cities turns thick, grey and choking. Soot coats the buildings, blackens the washing on the line, and settles into the lungs of everyone who breathes it. On the worst days, the smoke mixes with river mist into a heavy fog so dense you can barely see across the street, and the coughing spreads through the population like a season of its own. It is simply the price of a bustling, industrious age. You learn to squint, to cover your mouth, and to accept that even the very air here is quietly working against you. The cause is coal, and coal is everywhere. It heats the homes, cooks the food, and powers the workshops and industries of a growing city, burned in countless fires that pour their smoke into the sky day and night. There is no cleaner alternative and no thought given to the consequences, so the smoke simply accumulates, hanging over the rooftops in a permanent grey pall. The bigger the city grows, the more fires burn, and the thicker the air becomes. Prosperity and pollution rise together, and the price of a warm hearth and a busy trade is a sky that has forgotten how to be blue. The effects are visible on every surface. Soot settles over the whole city, blackening the fine stone of buildings, staining the clothes hung out to dry and coating windows in a grimy film. Anything left exposed to the air takes on the same dingy hue, and keeping anything clean becomes a constant losing battle. The city wears a permanent layer of filth, deposited quietly from above, and the grand buildings meant to impress are streaked and darkened by the very air around them. It is a place where cleanliness is not just difficult but very nearly impossible. Worse than the stains is the harm to the body. The smoke-laden air is breathed in by everyone, and it settles in the lungs, aggravating coughs, chests, and every kind of breathing complaint. On days when the smoke combines with the damp fog rising off the river, the air grows so thick and foul that it becomes genuinely dangerous, and the sick, the old, and the frail suffer most. Waves of coughing and illness sweep through the population when the air is at its worst, and though no one measures it precisely, the toll is real. The city-owned atmosphere is slowly poisoning the people who live in it. The fog itself becomes a defining feature of the age, a heavy grey blanket that can descend and swallow the streets, reducing visibility to almost nothing. In such a fog, the familiar city turns strange and menacing, sounds muffled, shapes looming out of the murk, ordinary journeys becoming disorienting and slow. It is atmospheric in a grim way, and it works its way into the character of the place, but it is also a hazard, choking and blinding, a reminder that the air here is thick with more than mist. People move through it carefully, handkerchiefs to their faces waiting for it to lift. All of this is accepted as the natural condition of city life, the unavoidable byproduct of warmth and work and progress. Only much later will the true cost of such air be reckoned with and steps taken to clear the skies. But for now, the smoke is simply part of the city, breathed in without much complaint by people who know no different. You pull your collar over your mouth and press on through the grey. And when you finally reach the shelter of a fine house, spare a thought for the people who keep it running, labouring unseen in the dark below the elegant floors. In the fine townhouses of the wealthy, an entire hidden world hums along beneath the polished floors. Servants rise before dawn and work until long after their masters sleep, hauling coal, emptying chamber pots, blacking grates, and carrying water up endless flights of stairs. They are expected to be invisible, silent, and endlessly available, moving through back corridors and hidden doors so as never to be seen at their labours. Their wages are small, their days impossibly long, and their freedom almost non-existent. The elegant, effortless comfort of the household above depends entirely on the exhausting, unseen effort of the people below. Grace, it turns out, is very hard work for somebody. The grand house runs on the labour of many hands, arranged in a strict order of their own. There are cooks and kitchen maids, footmen and housemaids, and a whole staff whose combined effort keeps the household functioning. Each has a place and a set of duties, and the work never truly stops, for the comforts the family enjoys, the warm fires, the clean rooms, the meals appearing as if by magic, all require constant grinding effort behind the scenes. The house is a machine, and the servants are its moving parts, labouring out of sight to produce the seamless ease their employers take for granted. The days are staggeringly long. A servant rises before the family, often before dawn, to light the fires and begin the endless round of tasks, and continues working until the household retires, which may be very late indeed. In between comes a ceaseless flow of duties, cleaning, carrying, fetching, serving, much of it heavy and unpleasant. Coal must be hauled up from the cellars, water carried up flight after flight, chamber pots emptied, grates cleaned and blacked, floors scrubbed, and all of it done again the next day. There is little rest and little respite, and a servant's own time is a scarce and precious thing. Perhaps the strangest expectation is invisibility. A well-run household prizes servants who do their work without being seen or heard, appearing only when summoned and otherwise moving through the house by hidden means. Back stairs and concealed passages are built precisely so that servants can go about their labours without crossing the family's path, and a servant caught idling or seen where they should not be risks rebuke. They are meant to be present and useful, yet somehow absent, the invisible hands that make the household work. It is a peculiar demand to labour constantly while pretending you're not there at all. For all this the rewards are meagre. Wages are low, and though a servant's room and board are provided, their freedom is heavily constrained, their lives largely dictated by the needs of the household. A servant's fortunes depend greatly on the character of their employers, for a kind household can offer a tolerable, even secure life, while a harsh one can make the work a misery. There is little job security either, for a servant might be dismissed on a whim, and a lost position is a serious matter. It is life of dependence, comfort for the master bought with the toil of the servant. Yet below stairs is also its own community, with its own hierarchy, gossip, friendships and small pleasures, a world running in parallel to the grand one above. The servants know the family's secrets, share their own jokes and quarrels, and build lives within the narrow space allowed them. It is a hard existence, but a human one lived out in the kitchens and corridors that the family above scarcely thinks about. You watch a housemaid slip through a hidden door, arms full, and appreciate the effort behind every comfort. And comfort in this fragile age is always shadowed by its opposite, for death is never far from any household, grand or humble, and the Georgians live alongside it in ways your own century has largely forgotten. Death is everywhere in Georgian England, and rather than hide from it, people wrap it in ritual. Mourning has its own strict rules of black clothing, its own jewellery made from the hair of the departed, and its own quiet keepsakes meant to hold on to those who are gone. With disease common and life often short, few families are untouched for long, and children in particular are lost at rates that would break a modern heart. Yet through it all, people carry on with a stubborn, tender resilience, holding funerals, keeping mementos, and remembering their dead with real care. In a world this fragile, grief is not an interruption of life. It is simply part of it. The nearness of death shapes everything. Disease moves easily through crowded towns, medicine can do little to stop it, and life expectancy is low. Dragged down above all by the loss of the very young. A family might have several children and lose more than one of them, and few households escape the death of someone dear over the years. This is not a rare tragedy, but a common thread running through nearly every life. People grow up knowing loss intimately, expecting it, and living always within reach of it, in a way that is hard for a safer age fully to imagine. Because death is so ever-present, the age gives it a great deal of ceremony and care. Mourning is governed by customs observed closely, with black clothing worn for set periods, and the depth of one's mourning signalled by dress and manner. Funerals are important occasions, marked with due solemnity, and the rituals surrounding death give shape and meaning to loss. These customs are not empty formality, but a way of honouring the dead and helping the living move through their grief, a structure to lean on when sorrow comes. To mourn properly is to show love and respect for the one who has gone. The keepsakes are among the most touching part of it. People treasure objects that keep the departed close, and one of the most striking is jewellery made using the hair of the dead, worn as a way to carry a piece of the loved one always. Lockets, rings, and other mementos hold these small physical remnants, turning grief into something that can be held in the hand and worn against the heart. There is a tenderness in this that cuts through the centuries, the simple human wish to hold on to those we have lost, to keep some trace of them near even after they're gone. The loss of children weighs heaviest of all. So many are lost so young that the age develops its own ways of remembering them, its own portraits, its own mementos, its own quiet grief. Parents who bury their children carry a sorrow that no ritual can fully ease, and yet they endure, holding fast to memory and to one another, and going on with the business of living because they must. There is a quiet heroism in that endurance, in loving deeply in a world that so often takes the beloved away, and in refusing to let grief harden into despair. What comes through most, looking back, is not morbidness but resilience, a people who lived close to death and met it with ceremony, memory and love rather than denial. They did not have the medicine or the safety your century enjoys, and so they made their peace with loss in the ways available to them, honouring their dead and holding their living close. You think of the hair kept in a locket, the small graves tended with care, and feel a deep respect for a people so practised in both grief and endurance. And if death shaped how Georgians mourned, it shaped how they lived and loved too, for even something as tender as marriage was, in this age, a matter of hard practicality more often than romance. Marriage in Georgian England is often less about love and more about property, alliance and survival. Among the wealthy, matches are arranged for land and connection, with young people paraded before suitors like goods at a fair. Among the poorer sort, there is a stranger option still. Quick, cheap, no questions. Asked weddings performed in the shadow of a debtor's prison, where couples can be married on the spot with little more than a fee and a willing officiant. Some are eloping lovers, some are drunk, and some are being married against their better judgment. It is chaotic, occasionally scandalous, and about to be swept away by new laws. But for now, love here comes with very fine print. For the wealthy, marriage is a serious matter of family strategy, and love is often the last thing considered. A good match brings land, money, connections and status, and parents arrange the unions of their children with these goals firmly in mind. A young woman of fortune is a prize to be bestowed carefully. Her marriage a negotiation between families over property and advantage. Young people are introduced with an eye to their suitability, their worth measured in acres and income, and personal feeling comes a distant second to the interests of the family. It is less a courtship than a merger. The great occasions of fashionable society double as marriage markets, where eligible young people are displayed and appraised. The seasons of balls, assemblies and social gatherings serve a clear purpose beneath the elegant surface, bringing marriageable men and women together under the watchful eyes of their families. A young woman is presented, her charms and her fortune noted, her prospects assessed by suitors and their relations alike. It is a polished, mannered affair, but the underlying business is plain enough. The pairing off of the right people for the right reasons, with the young people themselves often having remarkably little say. At the other end of society, marriage takes a far rougher and quicker form. In certain places, notably in the shadow of the debtors' prisons, there flourishes a trade in fast, cheap weddings, performed with none of the usual formalities or delays. For a small fee, a couple could be married on the spot by an officiant willing to ask no questions, and this convenience attracts all manner of people. Runaway lovers escaping disapproving families, couples in a hurry, and some who barely know what they're doing all find their way to these hasty unions. It is marriage stripped down to its barest legal bones, quick, quiet, and often regretted. These clandestine weddings cause no end of trouble. Because they are so easy and so private, they open the door to all sorts of abuses, hasty marriages entered into rashly, unions arranged by trickery or pressure, and disputes over whether a marriage had even validly taken place. A person might be bound for life by a ceremony conducted in minutes, sometimes in questionable circumstances, and the lack of proper records and safeguards makes the whole business ripe for scandal and fraud. It is a loophole in the marriage laws large enough to drive a great deal of misfortune through, and its consequences are frequently unhappy. Eventually the law steps in to close the loophole, imposing proper requirements on marriage and putting an end to these instant unions, bringing order to what had been chaos. But for a time, the contrast stands stark. The grand, calculated matches of the wealthy on one hand, and the reckless, whispered weddings of the poor on the other, both of them so often having little to do with love. You reflect that romance, in this age, is a luxury few can simply indulge. And speaking of the ways this century puts people on display and reduces them to their usefulness, or their strangeness, there is one last spectacle to consider, one that turns human beings themselves into an attraction. Step into the fairs and showrooms of Georgian England, and you find that the public appetite for spectacle extends even to people themselves. Individuals with unusual bodies, rare conditions, or striking differences are put on display before paying audiences who come to stare and marvel. Some of those exhibited earn a living this way and manage their own affairs. Many others have little say in the matter and little protection. It is treated as harmless wonder, a fascination with the extraordinary, but beneath the spectacle lies a hard truth about how easily this age turns people into objects. What one century calls entertainment, another remembers with a wince. The fascination grows out of a genuine curiosity about the unusual, but it plays out in ways that stripped away dignity. A person whose appearance or condition set them apart could become an attraction, exhibited at fairs, in taverns, or in rooms hired for the purpose, with crowds paying to look. The public came in numbers, drawn by the promise of seeing something rare, and the person on display became the entertainment, their difference the whole of the show. That a human being could be presented in this way, as a marvel to be gawked at, was accepted as ordinary, an unremarkable feature of the age's amusements. For some of those exhibited, the arrangement offered a measure of agency and even prosperity. A person able to manage their own showing could earn a real living from it, control how they were presented, and secure a degree of independence that other paths in life might not have offered. In a world with few options for anyone who fell outside the ordinary, exhibiting oneself could be a rational choice, a way to turn a difference that might otherwise have brought poverty or exclusion into a source of income. These individuals were not simply victims, but people making the best of a narrow set of possibilities. For many others, however, there was little choice and little protection. Some were displayed with scant regard for their wishes, their difference exploited by others for profit, their consent barely considered. The line between willing performer and exploited spectacle was often blurred, and the power in the arrangement rarely lay with the person on show. Vulnerable people could find themselves treated as property, their humanity secondary to their value as a curiosity, and there was little in the way of law or custom to safeguard them. The spectacle that entertained the crowd could be, for its subject, a form of quiet degradation. What is uncomfortable to sit with is the casualness of it, the way an entire society could pay to stare at fellow human beings and think nothing of it. The crowds did not, for the most part, see cruelty in what they were doing. They saw wonder, novelty, a diverting afternoon. That failure to recognise the dignity of the person behind the spectacle is precisely what marks the practice as a product of its time, a reminder that an age can be blind to the humanity of those it turns into objects of curiosity. The problem was not that Georgians were uniquely unkind, but that they had not yet learned to look at difference and see, first and always, a person. In time, attitudes shift, and the open exhibition of people as curiosities comes to be seen for the indignity it is, fading as a fuller sense of human dignity takes hold. But throughout the Georgian age it persists, popular and largely unquestioned. One more way the century put people on display for the pleasure of a crowd. You turn away from the showroom, unwilling to add your coin to the takings. And as our long day in Georgian England finally draws toward its close, there remains one last fate to consider, the one reserved for those the age wished simply to be rid of, sent away across the ocean to lands far from everything they had ever known. For many convicted of lesser crimes, the sentence is not death but exile, shipped across the ocean to labour in distant colonies for years, often never to return. Torn from home and family, they cross the sea in crowded, disease-ridden ships to a life of hard, unfamiliar toil in a strange land. For some it is a slow death sentence in disguise. For a rare few it becomes an unlikely second chance, a fresh start on the far side of the world. And so, as our long Georgian day finally winds down, and the gin fumes fade, and the wig comes off, and the last cart rattles home through the smoke, you find yourself grateful, deeply grateful, for the soft, safe, ordinary comforts of your own quiet century. Transportation offers the age a convenient answer to a difficult question. The prisons are inadequate. The appetite for hanging every petty offender is limited even here, and yet something must be done with those convicted of crimes too serious to ignore, but not grave enough to warrant death. The solution is to send them away, across the ocean, to labour in the colonies for a term of years. It removes the offender from the country, supplies useful hands to distant settlements, and spares the authorities the trouble of housing them at home. For the state, it is tidy and practical. For the person transported, it is the loss of nearly everything. The sentence begins with a dreadful voyage. The convicts are loaded onto ships and carried across vast stretches of open sea in conditions that are cramped, filthy, and rife with disease. The journey is long and perilous, and not everyone survives it, for sickness moves easily through the crowded holds, and the weeks at sea take their toll. Those who endure the crossing arrive in a strange land, far from anything familiar, to begin a term of hard labour under a hot and unfamiliar sky. The distance is so great that return for most is simply unimaginable, the old life severed as completely as if by death. What awaits at the other end is years of toil in the service of the colony, work that is hard and often harsh, in a place utterly foreign to everything the convict has known. Family, friends, and home are left behind, likely forever, and the letters that might once have connected them stretch thin across an ocean and often fail entirely. For many, transportation is exile in the fullest sense, a life sentence in all but name, ending far from the land of their birth among strangers. The grief of that separation, for the transported and for those left behind, is one of the quieter sorrows of the age. And yet, for a fortunate few, the story bends towards something better. Once a term of labour is served, Some find that the distant land offers opportunities the crowded, hierarchical old country never would. A chance to work land of their own, to build a life, to become something more than the poor and desperate figures they had been at home. The very ocean that carried them into exile also carried them beyond the reach of their old circumstances, and a handful seized the chance to begin again. It is a bitter irony that a punishment meant to cast them out could, on rare occasions, set them free in ways they had never known. So our long day in Georgian England comes to its end. You have woken in filth, drunk gin for courage, painted your face with poison, and eaten bread that might be chalk. You have watched the sick displayed and the condemned paraded, dodged the press gang and the highwayman, breathed the killing smoke, and stood at the edge of one cruelty after another that everyone around you thought entirely ordinary. It has been a hard, strange, and often sorrowful journey through a world that treated so much suffering as simply the way of things. And now, as the candle gutters and the noise of that distant century fades, it is time to leave it behind and return, gratefully, to the gentle comforts of your own. And so we come to the end of our journey through Georgian England, that powdered, poxy, gin-soaked world, where the elegant and the horrifying walked hand in hand down the very same street. You survived it, at least in your imagination, which is more than a great many people who actually lived there could say. You woke on a rope, dodged the contents of a window, drank your breakfast, painted your face with poison, and watched a century treat cruelty as an ordinary afternoon out. It is easy, from the soft comfort of now, to laugh at the towering wigs and the chalk in the bread, but behind all the absurdity were real people, doing their best in a world that offered them so little. They endured filth and hunger and hardship we can scarcely picture. They buried far too many of their children and kept on loving anyway. They lived close to death and met it with ceremony, with keepsakes, with a stubborn, tender resilience that deserves our quiet respect. They were not so different from us. They simply had none of the things we lean on without a second thought. So tonight, as you settle into your clean, warm bed, with safe water in the tap and medicine on the shelf and air that will not slowly choke you, spare a gentle thought for them. For the climbing boys and the foundlings, the servants below stairs and the mothers who gave up everything, the ordinary souls who carried the weight of that hard age on their backs so that easier ages might one day follow. They endured the worst of it, so that you might drift off into the very best. Rest easy now. You have earned it, and so, long ago did they.